Hello, everybody. I'm Alan Frame. I'm president of the board of the Camera Club of New York. It's great to see you here. I know it's a busy holiday season and people are out doing a lot of things. It's great to have you here. And it's great to know so many people in the room. Hi, Eileen. And people walking in that I know. The Camera Club is on 37th between 8th and 9th. We have a gallery there, dark rooms, color and black and white, shooting studio, scanning stations, and we do this lecture series here off-site. So thanks to SVA and our support staff upstairs who are helping us out. We have a show in our gallery now called Young, Gifted, and Black that is closing Saturday. We have a talk tomorrow night at the Camera Club by an experimental filmmaker, Tom Jarmusch, at 7. The next lecture in this series in January is by Susan Lipper, and then we'll be doing it once a month through April. And we have a residency program at the Camera Club, and the deadline for that was today. If you were interested and you missed it, look out for that next year, because it's a great program. People get to come for 3 months and use our facilities free, and they get a $3,000 stipend, and now they also get a show in our gallery and another $3,000 stipend to have that show. The deadline is midnight. Oh my God, so. So it's really fun for me to be able to introduce Neil, because I've known him a long time. He's a close friend and one of my favorite artists. I think we met around the time that he had a show at PS 122 Gallery in the East Village, which was in the early 90s. I loved that show. I've been paying attention to his work since then, as a lot of you know, showing it and referencing it in my classes. He's been generous enough to update me with DVDs so that I could do that. His most recent show was a retrospective at the Museum of the City of New York earlier this year. It was an incredible show, mostly video and some still photographs. What I really appreciate about what he does in his work, there are basically two things. One is this body of work that is all about New York public space. You know, there have been so many great street photographers that in the spirit of the flaneur photographed New York, and I feel like that tradition was at its zenith in the 60s with Winogrand and Arbus. And it's really been hard for still photographers to add to that. I teach at ICP, and there are always a lot of people there, especially who come in wanting to do documentary and going out on the street and doing that. But, you know, it's sad to say it's all been done. It's hard to figure out what to add. And, you know, I can think of a few examples in still photography, like Peel de Corsha, recently Paul Graham, who've had some new ideas that have added to that. Neil in video, and I don't think really thinking about that tradition that much, I feel has renewed that perspective and figured out fresh and witty ways to talk about that. And over the years since I've known his work, it's evolved, I think, into a more intimate direction, so that now when we see people emerging from the subway or we're encountering them in public space, it's in a very intimate space, although, you know, they're still strangers. But the other part of his work really is very intimate, and it's very poignant, and it has generally had to do with his parents, whom I came to adore as characters in his work. And I think as he's going forward, those two directions have come together more. His still photographs surprise me when he does them. The image that we used for the poster, I just find to be, and I hope you'll talk about it, really beautiful evocation of sense of mortality, time passing. And this series that he did that I just love, that is funny and erotic at the same time, of the elbows of truck drivers, like caught from the perspective of a bicyclist going by. You're going to show that tonight? So it's a big range in the work, but it's also like very consistent and funny, and really sometimes very moving as well. So my great pleasure to introduce Neil Goldberg.
Thank you, Alan. And thank you, everyone at the Camera Club, for helping to make this happen. I really appreciate it. And thank you for everyone for coming. I'm sure you had a bunch of other things you could have done tonight. So I really appreciate that. And it's wonderful to be introduced by Alan. Not to turn it into a mutual admiration society, but yes, there's admiration there. So, so I'm going to show, we'll see what I'm going to show, and feel free to speak up. We'll have a Q&A at the end, but if I'm interruptible as well. I do as Alan pointed out, I do a couple of different types of work, mostly with photography and video, primarily video. And there are strands within that. I could talk in a very highfalutin way about what my interests are, but I think a lot of it just comes down to, well, I have a friend, Jennifer, who's not here tonight, who, when she was a kid, she used to say, she was fascinated by people, and she was always like, wow, so that's what the humans do. And I think I had a bit of that too, where a feeling of like, here we are alive. Isn't that just intrinsically strange, beautiful, heartbreaking, fascinating? And a lot of my work is just about that idea of like, here we are alive, or I hope it is. So I thought the work that kind of most addresses that was brought together, a lot of it in that show at the Museum of the City of New York earlier this year. So I thought, as a way to introduce it, I'd show basically a compilation, an installation view of that show that's being used to travel the show. And it shows a little bit of how the work interacts among itself. That was my first video project. These are people describing their ride on the Cyclone. And this is a project where I went around the city on days that I was rained out from shoots and just hung my camera in a plastic bag from trees and street signs. In places I would normally be shooting. And she's she's one of my favorites. So I thought I would take you through some of the pieces that are make up the made up that show. Also, I'm going to play around with doing maybe a little bit of reading and storytelling. I feel like storytelling has become kind of a genre that I think is poised to take the place of mime as a really embarrassing. We'll look back on storytelling, but nevertheless, I'm going to tell some stories. Maybe, we'll see. We're going to play it by ear. But so a lot of my work is interested in these everyday moments that consensually we've decided don't matter. Or aren't worthy of our attention, and I'm just interested in what happens when we focus attention on them. Just trying to see where I'm going, sorry. So this is one of the pieces, it's called Salad Bar. And title is fairly descriptive of the content. When I was young, I used to be embarrassed, this is like first-ish grade, of the word food. Somehow I felt like it conveyed so much need. There was something abject about it, that ooh sound, food. I remember I had a teacher who used the word, and I felt embarrassed for her. It was my first experience of feeling embarrassed for someone, which, when you think about it, is such a odd thing to feel embarrassed for someone. I feel like each of us probably does a pretty good job of feeling embarrassed for ourselves. Or some of us could probably do a better job with it. I think my shame or embarrassment around that word, food, somehow traced back to, I had a brother, an older brother. I was born, when I was born, who had cystic fibrosis, which is a disease of the lungs, and so which he eventually died from. And so I think a lot of my work was shaped by being born into this family where death was very present. And I think that might also explain a little bit of my feeling of like, oh, this is what the humans do. I don't remember him having difficulty eating, but somehow the very basic functions of life always felt like, wow, okay. I felt notable. And I think it's also why I'm very interested in dance. Also, when I was around this age, I thought only other people's eyes moved around. and I found it kind of creepy. I was sure my eyes didn't move. I would just turn my head to look at what I wanted to look at. But other people had this really disturbing habit of their eyes kind of moving around in their head. It felt so literal to me. It was really disappointing. And then I remember at a certain point I realized, wait, my eyes move around too. And that was disappointing too. I find the people in this video very poignant. There's something kind of childlike about it for me, their faces. But also there's something, I think, kind of ruthless. And, you know, after all, what they're eating, what they're scanning are animals that have been killed for them, or plants. I think plants probably, to the extent, the question of agency is complicated, but I think plants live, and they have a preference to live. I don't know what preference means in that case, so there's something kind of violent in eating plants too. This was also the hardest project I've ever shot because it involved, I couldn't get permission to do it, so it involved lots of, I've gotten very used to being kicked out of places, mostly just in my personal life, but also professionally. But this involves some very harsh being kicked out. So I was able to shoot for probably about 5 minutes at a time from one salad bar to the next until the owner got wise and invited me to leave. And a piece that relates to that, that was from 2006, as you saw. You know, my early work, you saw that the video of people opening their gates in the morning. And a companion piece to that, which I can show you just a quick bit of, was this, it's called Hallelujah Anyway, which for me was kind of a, not a motto, but a, you know how corporations have mission statements, as disgusting as that is? I feel like somehow Hallelujah Anyway incorporates a lot of, is something that contains a relationship to life that I really identify with. You know, life is intensely difficult and painful, you know, and thank God for it. The hallelujah and the anyway. I'm not sure which is which. But so anyway, these were shots of elderly folks pulling themselves up the stairs of a bus. And I just love, for me, this whole piece started with gesture. That moment when you see a hand kind of reaching into a bus as a passenger. And to me, this is dance. And a lot of my work has been very influenced by dance, and a lot of my earlier works in particular, I think, were very focused on the way bodies move through space. I think more recently, I've become interested in something a little bit more inwardly focused, like the salad bar piece we just saw, or this piece, which I'll show you a little bit of, called Surfacing. We saw a little bit of it in the last piece, in the footage from my show. This piece makes me think about how we start our days. Che was nice enough to bring me a cup of coffee, and I was thinking about that first cup of coffee or whatever your caffeinated beverage is in the morning. So much hope and possibility in that first cup. We want to live in that mind space forever. A perpetual first cup of coffee of the mind, which is perhaps why old school diners offer a quote-unquote bottomless cup of coffee. Maybe that's the promise they're offering. But of course, there is no bottomless cup. You have a second, and that cup is just a little bit desperate and sad. But still, there's something there. And for some of us, there's the third cup, and the less said about that, the better. And we start each day clean with a shower, and bit by bit get dirty. The dirt and stink of the city seeping in, and the dirt and stink of our own bodies seeping out, like our own personal tidal system. And maybe that's why they have a laundry detergent called Tide. And I'm always grateful it's possible to get clean, to wash off the dirt and stink of a day. It didn't have to be that way. Odors could be permanent. I also, by the way, appreciate that it doesn't hurt to breathe. And sometimes at the end of the day, I have the feeling that the only thing I've done is generate laundry. Not do laundry, create laundry. And that's not such a bad feeling in the end. It's a feeling of productivity in its own way, to have stunk up one's clothes. And I think it's possible to draw a connection between the pleasure of throwing laundry in the hamper and the pleasure of finishing food in the refrigerator. A very privileged type of pleasure. The pleasure of consuming something and being done with it. The pleasure of it being gone. I think if we look deep down, there's even a certain horrible, complicated pleasure in throwing food in the trash. I became interested in this moment when people are, emerge from the subway. Well, like with so many projects, you become interested in it, and you're not really sure why. And it was only afterwards that as I started editing it, that I realized I started making this project just about a year or so after my father died. And I realized that the expressions I was seeing on people's faces kind of resonated with what I was feeling, this feeling of disorientation, a kind of complicated disorientation. And hopefully in my work I like to create a kind of blank screen that, not a fully blank screen, but images that are available for projection. So that I've heard a lot of people describe this as funny or uplifting, which is all great. She's one of my favorites. I always have favorites in sorry about that menu bar. It's a very complicated relationship that one has with these people. They kind of pass through your life for 10 seconds, and then you spend the rest of your life, I do, editing them, and I feel kind of like a probably slightly unhealthy feeling of having I think I like to think I know more about these people than I actually really do. So this goes on for quite a while. I'll just so as part of that show at the Museum of the City of New York, as Alan mentioned, there were also, it was a combination of video and photography. Why video, why photography? I think obviously that's a question, a complicated question in the history of media making, but for me a lot of it has to do with, well, obviously a question of time. How much is there are certain projects that could. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to remember. Shelley, what's the keyboard keystroke? Command L? No, I'm in. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Shelley. There are certain projects, actually, now that I've done that, I want to switch out of this, but certain projects that feel like they benefit from the, through watching them evolve in time, and other projects that actually are undermined by that. So this project started out as a video. It was a video I did of people at the moment that they missed the subway. And somehow editing it, I just felt like there was nothing there. But having spent a lot of time on it, I felt committed to seeing if I could recuperate. And only as I started digging around among the stills, I found these images that felt evocative of old master painting. But when the element of time was present, the piece entirely fell apart. And to Alan's point, or Alan mentioned this, oh, I didn't bring it, I'm sorry. The truck driver's elbows, but that was a fun project to do, and I appreciate that you point out the. I love hearing that you find it sexy, which I do too, and you feel a little kind of. I can feel a little bit like fetishistic to acknowledge that, but there it is. This is another project from that show. These were. I love that moment when you emerge from the subway or you're approaching the entrance to the subway and you see this kind of resplendent patch of light in the middle of like all the scuzz and, you know, grossness of the subway, which I actually find the environment of the subway kind of pleasant and comforting. Not all the time, but often. I love the quality of the air there, how it has its own kind of I don't know, gravity or, you know, density. I love the transition going down into the subway. It always feels like always good for a little moment of drama. You feel like you're entering a different ecosystem. And likewise coming up. So I just love these moments that kind of heavenly moments in the middle of a kind of underappreciated environment. And I always felt like I had a friend who only chewed with the left side of her. She felt like the left side of her body got a bad rap because she was right-handed. And so whenever she ate dessert, she would only eat it with the left side of her mouth. And of course, it worked out that she got horrible cavities on the left side of her mouth. But I always felt like the trapezoid in geometry was like kind of like the, you know, the shape that didn't get no respect. So it feels good to me to honor the trapezoid in this piece. So I think I'm going to move on to a different body of work. Alan mentioned I do a lot of work with my family, and actually I'll show some of that. But first, some projects that I've been doing lately looks at, if there are artists here, you know, you spend a lot of time doing studio visits, and I've been using the trope of the studio visit as, or not the trope, but I've been using trying to treat studio visits as a moment of performance that can be explored. So in one of them, let's see, I had a friend of mine who's also an esteemed professor at CUNY Grad Center do an improv critique of my work.
And did you know that Neil's dad died? And that's his car filled with leaves. Damn, Neil's dad died. That shit is deep as hell. That's the actual car that his dad used to drive. Boo-hoo-hoo, boo-hoo-hoo. The leaves represent what's left over. Boo-hoo-hoo, boo-hoo-hoo. And look at these people. They're that too. Secretly, they just came out of the subway, which is just a fucking trip in this city. Boo-hoo-hoo. Boo-hoo-hoo. Neil is still suffering, and I am too, because you know my mom, she died too. But god damn, what are you gonna do? Because we're getting older and you just gotta work with it. Look at these queers up in the tree. You Neil likes the queers a little better than I do. Boo-hoo-hoo. Boo-hoo-hoo. Look over here. This upsets me a lot. It's these scary belly buttons. Young and cute. Old and not so cute. I'm about here. Look, if you want to see, cute little belly buttons, worked out in the gym. If you know what I'm talking about, boo-hoo-hoo. Boo-hoo-hoo. Neil is still with us. Thank God for that. He's got more queer work. I'll accept it, even though I'm a little queer-phobic. Boo-hoo-hoo. Boo-hoo-hoo. He's got all this other great stuff that I don't understand, but it's all about his artistic practice, including the old lady, and this thing that scares me a little bit because I'm not really into the animal kingdom. Boo-hoo-hoo. Boo-hoo-hoo. Neil's dad is gone. My mom, she's gone too. Boo-hoo-hoo, boo-hoo-hoo, boo-hoo-hoo. Maybe they're in heaven. Maybe they're in hell. Boo-hoo-hoo. Boo-hoo-hoo. I just damn well can't tell. Boo-hoo-hoo. Boo-hoo-hoo.
And something else I've been doing lately is inviting legendary drag queens to my studio to critique my work. This is just a short excerpt from, I don't know if any of you know Jackie Beat, who's a LA queen who, interesting, it's an experience I've had over and over again where folks are so cutting and fierce and, you know, shady on stage, but are pussycats when they come by the studio.
So these are, each of these represents like a different configuration of art from a very small apartment, and just the accumulation of dust and pins, pricks, etc., you know, nail holes and stuff that have been left in the wall.
They look fake. Which is a pet peeve of mine. One of the things that really bothers me, like if you're watching like Law and Order, SVU.
Yeah.
That's right. I want to say SVB.
Right.
And then they have like some little kid draws, you know, a disturbing photo about the man who hurt them. It's obviously done by some 37-year-old in the art department, or somebody who was in a, you know, a commercial for cereal and they have to pretend like they can't sing.
Right.
That's peeve of mine. But to know that they're real, again, the backstory, I have to backtrack this a little.
Yeah.
I keep looking at the one of your dad, and first of all, it looks like he's playing a panpipe almost every once in a while.
Yeah.
anyway, so the more you look at it, you know, and then especially like out of the corner of my eye. So
I see it. I haven't seen it. I want to show you a video of that. Yeah.
and then like when he first breathes out in the fog, it's almost like rays of light, or and then I start thinking like ectoplasm and like Victorian, like is that right? Victorian, like like mysticism,
right? It's like spiritualism.
Yeah,
like that's the
like psychic,
stuff like that. Yeah.
Anyway, so that's another layer of that. But see,
It looks fake.
well, I'm just saying, it looks like somebody had the idea, to me, there's a whole field of horrible.
So I thought I would show just a couple of pieces from a long-standing practice, as Alan mentioned, in which I collaborated, if that's the word, with my parents. I thought I'd show you a video from 1998, quite a while ago, called My Parents Read Dreams I've Had About Them. It lasts about 8 minutes.
Dream Mom had a prosthetic arm, her right arm, that was made of wood. Something had happened to her right hand, or some of the fingers on her right hand. She's excited to show me the prosthetic arm. She somehow helped design it. We shake hands. There's a little mitten-like thing covering her hand. Her grip is very strong. The arm is very noticeable, more so than most prosthetic arms, because it's made of wood and is sort of built up on top of her real arm, sort of like scaffolding around a building.
Dreamed something about Dad. He had his own tiny personal EKG machine and would periodically check his statistics. It was almost like a laptop, and he enjoyed checking himself, would do it almost recreationally. In the dream, I come visit while he happens to be doing this, and I'm struck by a strong feeling of love for him, and tell him how much I love him and how. I think I'm not ready for him to die, or maybe that I am ready for him to die if that is what he needs to do. We hug, maybe cry, very intense.
Dream, big party at my parents' house for me, or maybe not just for me. I'm surprised how many people make it out to Long Island. There's a pile of towels like it was a pool party, but it's not. It's for people taking showers and brushing their teeth. 2 activities featured at this party. There's a long line for the bathroom. I flirt with a good-looking boy. I can't tell if gay or straight. Has a foreign accent. Mom looks on. I act clever, but he barely responds. I tell him an idea I have for a video project in which I would mount a tiny camera on the end of a thin, flexible tube. He says that's already been done.
Dream. I'm looking out across a distance at Dad. He's in an office, no, an apartment building, high up, and I'm in another building. No, I'm in a blimp. I get his attention. At first he doesn't see me in the blimp. Then when he does, we do some sort of mid-air dance I think he goes up in some sort of air vehicle. I'm in the blimp and we sort of dance. It's extremely fun. But then I get pulled in the air current of a big airplane and it gets scary, like I might get sucked into its jet engine. Also, I'm afraid of the public spectacle of it. Everyone can see me in the blimp, but it works out okay. I have some sort of hard landing in water and then find myself water skiing.
Dream I'm holding a baby. Don't remember whose. Mom is there. She's helping me take care, even though I don't really need the help. I give her 22 rules about how she should treat me and the baby. They feel kind of superfluous and officious. One was to make sure that she centered the baby perfectly on the cloth I had placed on my lap in case the baby threw up. Don't remember the other rules.
Dream. Dad lived by himself in a depressing room, in a depressing place, just over a restaurant or cafe. The room had a big glass wall facing the hallway. There are vertical blinds over the wall, but you could see in. The slats didn't close completely. Came there and Dad was sleeping. I could see him from the hall. He had called to tell me he had cut his foot on some glass that I had left on the floor. It turns out he actually cut himself on a bag of glass which I left in the garbage. I had broken a glass, swept it up, and put it inside another bag in the garbage. And Dad was stomping down in the garbage, compressing it, and that's how he cut his foot.
Dream I'm watching a Jerry Lewis movie. It's the first one I've actually gone to a theater to see, rather than watched in pieces on TV. I want to find it funny. There's a scene where Jerry has some sort of gash in his head, is bleeding, and is eating an apple. Takes a big bite out of the apple, then puts it on top of gash while he chews. The apple gets all bloody. He takes another bite. I laugh really hard, but I'm not sure if I actually find it funny or just want to find it funny. The guy next to me or behind me asks me to sink down in my seat. I'm blocking his view. I tell him I can't. I'm already slouching down. When the movie is over, I see that he's a midget. Turns out I'm at the movie with Mom. I tell her in a stage whisper, he needs to bring a training seat. She gets mad that I've said this cruel thing too loud. Turns out the midget is a relative.
Dream with Dad and Hal. We're driving, but there's something wrong with the car. It doesn't go forward, so we have to drive in reverse. We're on Long Island. I'm driving, and it's hard driving backward, looking over my shoulder. The fact that when you turn the steering wheel right, the car moves left. Dad doesn't look so good. He starts talking in a roundabout way about death. Howard kind of cuts him off by saying something optimistic. This pisses me off, prevents Dad from saying what he's feeling. I try to get Dad back to where he was, but no luck. At one point, we end up in a restaurant that Dad and Hal transform into three friends. Don't remember who. And we're at some sort of avant-garde dinner theater type thing.
So I think there's a lot contained in that video, backstory-wise. My parents, I think, didn't realize that they had a choice about whether they could participate in a video. If I asked them, they, I guess, felt like if I asked them, they had to say yes, which I think I took advantage of. But yeah, my only direction to them, because when we started to film it, they both were cracking up, understandably, I guess, complicated thing going on there. So that was my only direction, just try not to laugh. A piece that sort of fits with that is something I shot with my dad a couple years later, 3 years after that. My mom had died, and this piece is self-explanatory. It's about 8 minutes, but I'll just I'll run it for about 5, probably.
Hello. My son Neil asked me to explain how we handle the thank you cards written on behalf of my wife, Shirley Goldberg, who passed away on November 10th, 2000. Just about 6 months ago from today, which is May 8th, 2001. Actually, the bulk of the preparatory work was done by my son Neil, who typed a listing of the friends and relatives who came to the funeral services in New Jersey, who came to the apartment in New Jersey to pay a shiva crawl, and who came to the cemetery, which is located in Pine Lawn, Suffolk County, Long Island. The list also included those who sent or brought dinner trays, fruit trays, lunch trays, food trays, and people who spoke at the funeral. It also included people who made donations in my wife's name, sent sympathy cards, and so forth. People who were helpful included friends and relatives, of course, doctors, nurses, the hospice nurse, nurse's aides, physical therapist, the nurse coordinator at the hospice, social worker, etc. There were a total of 97 cards sent. In order to include something of a personal nature in the thank you cards, we enclosed a photo of Shirley and myself. I reviewed Neil's list and made up 18 acknowledgement phrases, sentences, paragraphs, which were included in the thank you cards which the funeral home supplied. I would use these sentences in different combinations as appropriate in the cards to different people. I would like to read these sentences to give you a sense of our feeling. 1. Thank you for your thoughtful sympathy card. 2. Thank you for your generous donation in honor of Shirley. 3. Thank you for your kind and thoughtful letter of condolence. 4. Thank you for your letter of support. Shirley had a very special, warm feeling for you. 5. Shirley really thought the world of you. 6. We hope you will derive some comfort and have some happiness from Shirley's photo enclosed. 7. We hope you will remember Shirley as she was in the photo. 8. We hope you will think of Shirley as she was in the photo. Next is, we hope Shirley's photo will bring back fond memories of the past. 9. Thank you for your valuable and considerate help during a trying time, 10. Thank you for your visit during the Shiva period. 11. Thank you for your support during the Shiva period. 12. Thank you for your very thoughtful dinner that you sent. 13. Thank you for your support during a very trying time. 14. Thank you for coming to the funeral services. 15. Thank you for coming to the cemetery. 16. Thank you for the lovely platter you sent. Now, I'm an engineer, and I looked at the total picture and decided that the best way to handle this was to put the appropriate sentence or phrase next to the name of the personnel, of the people who came, or who sent us condolence cards or platters. So I would like to tell you a little bit about a few of the people who we sent cards to. The first is a gentleman who I swim with most every day. His name is Alan Tedder. He also belongs to the YMCA, the local YMCA. And what I designated was sentences number 7 and 10 for Alan Tenney. And that stated, we hope you'll remember Shirley as she was in the photo attached. And number 10 is, thank you for your visit during the Shiva period. Thank you, Alan. Next is from a lovely woman, Mrs. Margaret Wilkie. She is a social worker with the Englewood Hospice. And she came during Shirley's trying times, and she has come several times since. She's a lovely woman, and I thanked her several times. Basically, the thank you card that I wrote her had 7A and 13. And 7A states, we hope you will think of Shirley as she was in the photo. 13 says, thank you for your support during a very trying time. We really appreciated Mrs. Wilkie's efforts. Next is a card that I wrote to my sister.
I think I'll stop it there. I think my dad had a crush on Margaret Wilkie. She was very nice. You know, as part of the hospice program, you get a certain number of, or a certain duration of visits with the hospice nurse even after the patient has passed away. And my dad was really diligent about getting those visits from Ms. Wilkie. As things go, my father died in 2007, and I actually, for about a year and a half after that, I found myself not able to make work. Not able isn't quite the word, it just kind of, that part of my brain got disabled, I would say. And I slowly returned to it with that piece we saw earlier of people emerging from the subway. And I put together a show that looked at his death and mortality, and hopefully those questions more broadly, called The Way Things Go, named after, I don't know if you know that Fishley and Weiss Rube Goldberg device video. So some of the pieces in that were I had inherited his car. This is the piece from the invite. I inherited his car after he passed away, and I hate that expression, passed away. It's so cheesy. So after he died, and my brother always makes fun of me if I go on if I go traveling for business and I rent a car, he seems really interested in what car the rental company gave me, and I don't know, I think it was a Toyota, but I just don't seem to emotionally connect to cars, but I did to this after living with it for a couple of years in the city, and I really got into the rituals of car ownership in the city, like the whole alternate side of the street parking. Kind of became a very meditative experience for me, waiting in the car for the street sweepers to pass. And I've since talked to people. I have a friend who practices her opera while she's waiting for alternate side of the street parking, sitting in her car waiting for the street sweepers to come by. But I moved from the East Village to Columbus Circle, Hell's Kitchen area, and needed to get rid of the car, and which was long overdue. So this was a, I guess, little process I performed as a prelude to getting rid of the car, taking it to the park near where my dad lived and filling it with leaves. It's the same park that this last video I'll show you was shot, which is the last video piece I shot with him. And I'm just going to read something, which might last longer than the video. But so in that show, the way things go, it involved people emerging from the subway. That photograph is another photo series which I won't show, and a couple other pieces on this piece right here. This is something I wrote actually before Steve Jobs died. We're born, we live for a while, no one knows what they're doing. Steve Jobs gets pancreatic cancer. We have kids or don't, and before you know it, it's over. And we wake up in the morning and the DVR and the DVD player and the wireless router are all blinking at us, blinking like a dog waiting for you to fill its bowl, needing so much. The idea that they serve us is, of course, ridiculous. We approach them on their terms, use their remote controls, navigate their pull-down menus. And sure, one day our interactions with them will be more human, but in the meantime, human interactions are becoming more like the ones we have with our DVRs. And by the time the two catch up, it will be like, forgive me, Israel and Palestine, what with the settlements and the other encroachments and concessions, until there's nothing left. Let's run that one again while we're at it. Until there's nothing left of Palestine / our human interactions, which is not to say I don't believe in the right of Israel to exist. I do, even if it was a bad idea. But then again, it's hard to know. It's hard to think of an alternative from a 1945 perspective. And we all do the best we can, and Steve Jobs dies of pancreatic cancer, and the next guy isn't as good as Steve Jobs. And we tell our kids, or our brother's kids, we were alive when Steve Jobs was alive. And the world is so intensely far from perfect, and people blame that on the Jews. People want perfection so badly, or maybe not perfection, just something not so provisional, slapped together, doing what it can. And we blame the Jews because even with the polio vaccine or the theory of relativity, the world is just so horrifyingly flawed, and the thought of it being the world's fault, which is to say not a question of fault at all, is just too much, like a kid falling in the playground and then slapping its mother on account of gravity. And maybe there'll be a statue to Steve Jobs, though commemorative statuary feels very not 21st century and very not Steve Jobs. But maybe there's a way to do it. Maybe the statue is all holographic and virtual like you'd expect, or maybe it surprises you with its physicality. And maybe you believe in reincarnation and hope you'll pick up more or less where you left off, like when two monitors are connected to the same computer and the cursor reaches the end of one and jumps over into the other. I spent a week or so not using a computer, and when I went back, it hurt to navigate the menus, like I had gone from flying to a wheelchair. Which is not to say using a wheelchair would be so very bad. I want to think I could live with that because I may have to. Any of us may. And when I was studying programming in college, I remember going to bed and thinking, what is the algorithm for falling asleep? And you get older, and before you know it, even when you're just 48, and you know you're getting older when you say just 48, like your parents did, and then you keep moving the goalpost further and further, just like they did, until Aunt Sophie dies when she's just 70. Even when you're just 48, you start to dote on the kids in a burgeoning grandparently way. You start to feel so approving, not approving of the texting and the I this and the I that, which is frankly terrifying, not approving of anything at all specifically, just approving. Like how my grandmother used to say when I came down the stairs, look who's here, in her old world accent. My brother's kids don't care that my grandmother spoke with a Yiddish accent, and I can't blame them. And maybe there should be a statue to grandmothers with Yiddish accents, and maybe that one should be all holographic and virtual. Wouldn't that be surprising? Look who's here. And the kids are not going to do any better than you or I, that's for sure. They'll grow up and develop body odor of a not charming adult variety, and they'll eat animals, or maybe they'll eat only plants, and they'll have their own kids who will lose their hair and develop squamous cell carcinomas that need to be removed from their faces. And I still dream about my father and my mother, but never about my grandmother. And my brother says it's the same for him. And maybe someone will dream about me for a while, but their kids won't, and maybe that's not so bad. Maybe it's nice to flicker out like that, like the light from a dead star, to use an extremely overworked metaphor. A metaphor that should, by the way, be retired, because who cares if the star is dead? That's not the interesting part at all. The mere fact of the star and of its light, of their existence ever, that is the big story. And when you think about it, isn't every star a statue? Something from the past physically asserting itself in our present? The light from 1,000,000 years ago saying, look who's here, which is what statues do, say, look who's here, nothing more, look who's here. So I'm happy to answer any questions folks have, or thank you.
Raise your hand if you have one. Yeah, works. Thanks. My question's about your video work. When you make something indexical in nature, like the subway people or the salad bar, how do you know when you're done?
Such a good question. And I'd love to say I have like a really tight conceptual organizing principle that determines that I'm done. I've had a couple of pieces that did have that. Like I went to the corner of all the numbered intersections in the city, like 27th and 7th, and just videotaped people saying the location at which they were standing. So that had a built-in finishing point. But it's kind of a sloppy, arbitrary point. It's usually I'm sick of filming it, and then in terms of editing it, you know, something kind of gruesome happens there where with most of these projects, I'll start out with 2 hours of okay footage, and you know, one by one you just pick off your, you know, it's a little like, I don't know, it's like Auschwitz or something, you know. People are one by one eliminated from the piece. But that's a really unsatisfying, unrigorous underpinning of how something is done. And I love that you asked that question, because it's something I always ask myself. And it's a place where insecurity can really creep in when you're doing something and arbitrariness asserts itself, but it really is just very unglamorous and arbitrary like that.
Any more questions?
This is my shill, Sue. I knew you would be good for a question.
First of all, that was just extraordinary and really moving to see your work. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the process of collaborating with your parents and what they thought of being invited into your work, and if it was an interactive process or if it was always you directing them.
Good question. You know, when I was just thinking when I was watching this, it reminded me a little bit of, like, you know, the hostage footage where, you know, the U.S. government, you know, I renounce the U.S. government's imperialistic, you know, whatever. I feel like I did kind of take them hostage in a certain way, but they, like I said, you know, hardcore, you know, old world Jewish parents in terms of like, okay, my son wants to make a video with me in it. You know, there isn't this concept of like, I could say no. But my dad and my mom really was not into it. My dad grew to be very into it, and I would not infrequently get phone calls from him with ideas, you know. And he had a moment where one of the pieces was shown at Walter Reed Theater of Lincoln Center, very, you know, Lincoln Center in their view, and I couldn't make it to the screening, so my dad went on my behalf, and, you know, the email to Cousin Rosie, and, you know, you can imagine it was quite it was a moment. But they did give feedback and they did ask questions, and I think throughout, my parents, you know, were pretty clear about, like, I don't get why you're doing this and why anyone would want to see it, except weirdly that those photographs of my mom of subway passengers missing the train. That was like a turning point for my dad, and I don't know why. Suddenly he was like, got my work, or felt, he got that piece. I don't know why, for some reason that spoke to him, so.
I have a
imagine if
question.
we all live in this moment of discomfort of, will there be another question or not?
I have a question. The last piece that you did about your parents was your father in the car, right?
Yes.
Have you been doing anything else that maybe you're working on now or haven't shown, or?
Well, in terms of working with them?
Yeah, about your parents, or.
Yeah, because the piece, that show that kind of came that was that body of work right after my dad died. I showed in Munich, and I haven't shown it as a group here. And I'm talking about doing it as a show here. And there are a couple of pieces I'm working on. I took my dad's hearing aid and cast it in gold. And it's just this, I think, very beautiful relic in the old school sense of a relic. And then I'm trying to, you know how when you put a hearing aid in, you hear that kind of squeaky noise? I don't know if you have, anyway. It was a sound I really associated with my father, so I'm in the process of getting Itzhak Perlman, if anyone can get on the hooter with him. He's shockingly not returning my calls. I want to get him to try and make music with the hearing aid, with that squeaking noise of the hearing aid. I have a vision of him holding it, seeing his hand, and if you hold it a certain way and manipulate it, you do get almost, it sounds like a theremin, that. So I'd love to see him do it. Why him? I feel like he's a little bit of a mirror of my dad in a certain way. Also, a friend of mine has once had the opportunity to rehearse at his house, and she said she came in, he was in his shorts, it was the summer, and he was watching like a Knicks game while just kind of like playing this like fucking badass thing on his violin while just watching the Knicks. Anyhow, that's one of the reasons. So there are a couple other pieces I'd like to fold in. I did a piece that I want to flesh out a little bit called The Oys of My Father, in which I, my dad, I guess it's like the classic 50 words for snow in Eskimo languages. I felt like my dad could achieve a lot expressively with oi, and he had different nuanced ways of doing it. So, and they're still really kind of jammed in my brain, so I want to recreate them. I have a vision of a little tiny, like playing it off a little tiny iPod, but it being distributed throughout the gallery very loud. Anyhow, so that's one thought. And then I'm working on a bunch of projects that are not connected to them. So nice to have the lights on.
Well, thank you. It's very inspiring. Have you ever gone back to, or it's been present, your brother's loss and your relationship with him and a collaboration with your second sibling that you mentioned?
Yeah, I actually have a younger brother and an older sister. It's a good question. I feel like his death is more kind of like oxygen or something. It feels like, it's interesting to think about. I feel like his death so shapes everything I do and the way I see the world. I mean, in a way, most of these pieces, I probably could make an argument, I would believe myself, trace somehow to him. I should say he died when I was 4. He was 14 and I was 4, so it's a very specific type of relationship where I have like screen memories of him, which I don't even know if I can fully trust, but I have, let's say, a half dozen memories of him. But he lived very much in terms of, through the impact it had on my parents. And so he's kind of like permanently a ghost in a way, or a specter. It's interesting to think about. I hadn't thought about it. I guess we'll see. But yeah, it does feel like that's kind of what I've been doing for, I should say that I got into photography when I was like in 5th-ish grade because my dad set up a darkroom for me, which was, of course, wait for it, my brother's darkroom, my older brother's darkroom. So I grew up using his projector and all that, and just the language of projector is, perfect for it. So it's an interesting thing to think about. What's that? I want to play. Yeah.
First, I love the series of images of people emerging from the subway. I've often stood and watched people do that, and it was just great to see your view of it. I just love that. And I'm sorry if you said this and I missed it, but the commentary, your commentary towards the end where you were talking about at just 70 or at just 48? And what were you reading? Where does that come from?
That's something I wrote. When I was
to accompany?
No, it was something separate. I'm trying to, when I was a kid, I was a kid with dark room, but also like, embarrassing but incessant writing. And I'm sort of trying to play around with ways I can reconnect to writing. And I don't know if you're my guinea pigs. I'm not sure if it goes with the images, if it's something that's unto itself.
I thought it was wonderful.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
From the person who brought the coffee. I'll be thinking of you tonight. All night.
Thank you so much for the lecture. It was great to hear your stories as well with your images and videos. And my question was about the images of subway exit, your recent images. When I went to see your show at City Museum, and maybe because of the size of the photograph, it's like as big as almost my height.
Yes.
It's pretty big. And maybe because of the size or the beautiful light in the images, but I kind of felt like I was in the image, and also
interesting.
I kind of felt like I saw the leaves moving, or I could hear the wind in the images.
Oh, wow.
So at that moment, I kind of wondering if you ever considering to make it with video, not still images.
I hadn't thought about that one for that. Had you drunk a lot of coffee when you went there? I hadn't. I mean, I did want the feeling in terms of the scale and also framing them without glass. I did want to have a feeling of the scale kind of creating an opportunity for it to be immersive. I don't know. I'd be curious to try that as a video. Video is so frustrating in a certain way in its elusiveness, and that's part of the pleasure of it. But every time I think of something that resolutely, definitely can be a photograph, it's like, yes, I get excited to have an opportunity to do something that's a legit photograph. So I hadn't thought about that, but yeah. Thank you. Oh, talking to the wrong person here. Mark is a photographer. I probably can't speak to it theoretically. I could speak to it kind of personally, which is, grew up doing photographs, and at a certain point in 1993, got a video camera, and I was just like, I remember talking to another friend, we could not believe our good fortune that we could, make videos. It just felt so, so alive compared to photography. But in a certain way, I've kind of come full circle in that all the things, I was just saying this, I can't remember your name, but before, the elements that are missing, quote unquote missing from photography, as compared to video, the element of time, sound, or you're not, time in a different way. I guess photographs are all about time. Somehow those constraints leave it, for me right now, feeling richer, more exciting, and I can't explain why, but that's how it feels. So it's also nice to have something that I always feel like video doesn't really live in the world. I love that photographs insist on being physical objects, that that's just what they are. Whereas for me, I always feel like these videos kind of live in my mind, and I show them to people. it's totally arbitrary because you could make the theoretical case that these are all electrons, and it's arbitrary, but that's how it feels. I like that. Like, photographs feel like they don't need me in a way. There are probably other reasons it's interesting to think about.
Photographs are like a book. You hold them. I'm just reading about how the stacks in the library were destroyed. And I still use negative film.
Oh, wow, okay.
And I don't want to go to digital because I can remember developing my own negatives and printing my own negatives. And that personal involvement, the wonder, the amazement of taking people that have died and being able to bring them out and it renews the experience. And to me, we can't, with TV and the other kind and film, I love classic film. I love to go see films from the past that have my favorite performers in them. But to actually hold a photograph, it's like holding a book. I can give you that kind of an example.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you familiar with it. And I think of all of the photographs that people now, with this Hurricane Sandy, have lost.
Mm.
They've lost precious things, they've lost documents they need to use to identify themselves, but they've lost a lot of what was as well.
Mm. Except if they had it on a hard drive and backed it up to, you know, the cloud, and yeah, I don't know. I guess there is. You're speaking to the tactile quality of film, which is never of photography, which is never there with video, at least as I understand it. Video is intrinsically dematerialized. So yeah, I would agree with you. And I think that's where that feeling of personal, like the idea that all this stuff is just a figment that I'm responsible for. Somehow that's maybe partially why it attaches to that.
One more, maybe? No?
Thank you.